The ultra controversial Rings of Power is returning for a second season. Any Lord of the Rings fan, I would say the majority of Lord of the Rings fans, not interested in what looks like, sounds like, has been presented as a bastardization of Tolkien's work. So why bother with that? Let's go back 50 some odd years and go back to 1977, where the first iteration of the Lord of the Rings franchise was presented in the way of a animated feature, and this is a movie that I saw after the theatrical releases of the early 2000s. It is a very interesting telling of the Hobbit story. There would be an animated feature that was the Lord of the Rings, which represented Fellowship and Two Towers, and then there was a animated feature that was the Return of the King. But this was the first one. We've all seen this movie previously. I'd not seen this movie since the Hobbit, Peter Jackson Hobbit movies came out. So it was very interesting rewatching this and seeing the story they tell over the course of three movies all into one, considering it was one book originally. Rembo, you had seen this movie previously. I'm pretty sure both you and Callahan have seen this movie far more than me. What did you think of The Hobbit as a Lord of the Rings story in its animated form?
I still really enjoy it. It's got some very heavy '70s quirkiness to it with all the music, and it's like the random where it's just like in between scenes. There's just one line of singing to being like, "This is what we're feeling right now," and then it like goes on to the next scene, and that's kind of the whole movie. But I think it's great as far as feeling like it does a really good job of staying pretty true to the books. Doesn't have everything in it. I think it's under an hour and 20 minutes. It's very tight, but it's definitely not boring. And the animation is kind of interesting. Did not have a high budget for the time at all, but I think they do a really good job as far as bringing that world to life and being as accurate as they could have been. And also balancing the fact that this is definitely a kids movie. So yeah, I don't know. This is my seventh, eighth, ninth time seeing this. I don't even know how many times Cal and I have seen it, but yeah, a very enjoyable rewatch. Very, very enjoyable.
Callahan, welcome to Last Page, by the way. Uh, you've seen this movie probably the most, if I had to guess. Um, how does this movie hold up today, considering it's an animated feature of The Lord of the Rings, arguably the greatest trilogy of all time?
Yeah. So when I rewatched this, I kind of realized that not only is this a huge piece of my childhood because I watched it so much as a kid, but also the soundtrack. Anytime the soundtrack or the songs would be sung or music would be playing, I would hear it in my head and realize for the last decade, since haven't watched it for the last decade, these songs are playing in my head randomly. I'll randomly sing about riding down rivers in a barrel and just not realize that. I was like, just kind of like what comes to my mind immediately. So when I rewatched this, I'm taking into consideration so many different things, not only the original trilogy, but also the Hobbit trilogy and how that held up, or not trilogy, but how that held up. And then trying to look at it with new eyes. And something that stood out to me was kind of what Remy was saying was just, it's so 70s-esque, especially for a cartoon, where you watch 70s cartoons or 80s cartoons and you realize that animation is a lot less advanced than it is now. So they had to do a whole different approach when it came to storytelling. And something I appreciated about this, even though it is a cartoon meant for children, their storytelling was in a way where they choose to portray characters and portray the story in a way that we haven't really seen before. And like even characters, if you watch the Hobbit series, Martin Freeman portrays this character a lot differently than they portray the character in the cartoon. And so having to watch this again, not only just kind of like brought back all these memories as a kid, being able to see this cartoon, and the fact that as a kid I never really paid attention to the animation, but I do really wish we still had writers and storytellers that could portray the Lord of the Rings series the way they did back in the 70s.
It was a straight to NBC TV movie with a budget of about $3 million. So it's not a theatrical movie. The animation, most of the characters' like facial expressions are very limited. You don't really get a whole lot other than the monster characters, but the human characters, the dwarves, they really don't emote a whole lot physically. So it's pretty limited. There's very few sound effects. Most of the sound is the musical score that plays when there's battles or fights or intense sequences. There's very few sound effects. So I would say this movie's like a companion piece. If you've read The Hobbit, or I suppose if you've seen the Hobbit movies, then this would be a much easier watch because you already know the story and you can kind of go with it. The voice of Gandalf could have been Gandalf if the movie came out in the 70s, which is John Huston, famous director, directed Maltese Falcon, Treasure of Sierra Madre, Man Who Would Be King, legendary Hollywood man. He is the voice, as Michael Caine once said, he has the voice of God.
You mean you do not wish to share a grand adventure? Enough! I am Gandalf, and Gandalf means me.
And he is an excellent Gandalf voice in this. There's a couple actors that have been in previous things that I've seen. There's the Goblin King, who is voiced by Colonel von Scherbach of Stalag 17, which is a very, very deep cut. But
Very deep cut.
yeah, it's a very older cast. What I like about the movie, there's I would say 70s charm. There's very James Taylor-esque music that plays throughout the movie. There's a couple of bangers, which is pretty interesting, that there's a couple songs in this movie that are absolute bangers. The Goblin song. What's the other one? There's the Goblin song and
The glasses crack the plate. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates.
That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. So carefully with the plates.
Yeah, and that's a song that's pulled from the book. People forget, because of the movies, because of the Lord of the Rings movies, people forget that the books are filled with songs. And so that is a lost aspect for the most part. There's a couple songs in the movies, obviously, but it is a lost aspect of those Tolkien books, that there's constantly characters breaking out into songs. And even though this movie has a very 70s aesthetic, it does work for kind of translating that these characters are these joyous characters that like singing about what's going on in the world. And a couple of these songs are certified bangers. The goblins, they look amazing. The human characters are kind of whatever, but the goblins look amazing. They're these giant jawed monsters that have crazy eyes and saliva coming out. And the animations of those are very cool. Animation being that this was made by, wait for it, this was made by a animated studio in Japan called Topcraft. Topcraft ended up becoming Studio Ghibli, which is pretty crazy because that is pretty much the standard of animated movies today, as anything that Studio Ghibli makes. Caliburger, you are the anime guy. Did you feel any of those, even though Miyazaki did not work specifically on this movie or the Return of the King movie that Top Shelf handled, did you feel any of that kind of nuance from that would become Studio Ghibli?
That is a great question. So something I've noticed while watching, and you just hit on it, was you see these characters when you read them in the book. Your imagination brings up these horrifying creatures or these disturbing creatures, and these creatures that represent just evil and disgustingness. And then you see them in the movies, and they're done very well. But in The Hobbit, they're a little bit more CGI, so it's a little harder to like take it super real. Something I loved about this cartoon was you get to see these creatures portrayed in a way that you don't see anywhere else. And to bring it all the way from, the 70s all the way to Studio Ghibli and what they're doing now. When you watch movies today, Spirited Away and Totoro and Porco Rosso, you see these characters that are portrayed in such exaggerated levels, and then when they're bad characters, they're portrayed in ways that make you kind of like kind of flinch, where you see them at first and you're like, oh, that's like a weird way to draw that character, or like that's kind of odd. And I think that's something that's a little bit they haven't lost since the 70s, is they kind of figured out their niche of being able to draw and create this character that would make someone look at and say there's something wrong. I mean, the perfect example in this Lord of the Rings movie or the Hobbit movie is Gollum. You look at Gollum, you're like, what? It's just like you left a sponge in a sink for like a year and then you came back to it. It's just the most disturbing thing you've ever seen. When he opens his eyes, there's like 3 different colors like flashing, and then he's just got this like grassy look to his body, and you're thinking to yourself like, this used to be a hobbit and now it's this creature. But I think it's just that it's that ability to create and create this character and animate this character in such a way that makes people be able to see. And for instance, you see Gandalf and just the way he carries himself, especially one of his first lines when he says, I am Gandalf and Gandalf is me. And he like stands up and he's like got this power pose. You see him and you're like, whoa, this guy's like really powerful. But then you see someone like Gollum or with the Goblin King, and you're just like, what a sack of filth. Like, oh my goodness. And I think that's just something that they nailed on the head, especially with taking from Tolkien, from the books, and his ability to be so detailed and so specific about characters. I think they hit it right on the money. And I think the Studio Ghibli now is still taking care of that, doing it well.
Gollum, that was something I do. I think that's my favorite part of this movie is the back and forth with Gollum. Because it is very pulled straight out of out of the book. But there is something that I do have to show. I will never have another opportunity to flex other than this moment right now. I have had this graphic novel, this Hobbit graphic novel, since I was 10, maybe. It's fucking awesome. It is one of my favorite graphic novels, and it's the entire book so it's very detailed. And the animation style is super sick, but the way they do Gollum is also, there's literally pages falling out. I've had this for so long, but I gotta like hold it together. But this is how they portray Gollum. It's a little bit more like the movies, in his more just looks kind of like a goblin, like a little bit less scary, I would say, than the cartoon.
What year did that graphic novel come out?
This has been out for a while. So the contents of this book were originally published in 3 volumes in August 1989, April 1990, and August 1990. So literally 89 to 90. And yeah, it's super sick. They have like the map in it, and it's designed just like it is in the movie. You can see it's like with all the lettering and everything. It's fucking awesome. I love this book. I reread this thing and go through it. But I think what I really like about this cartoon and graphic novel is they portray things very similarly. But Gollum is way more horrifying in this than he is even in the movies. In the movies, he's not horrifying to look at. He's more pitiful, which I guess is kind of the point. But in this, he's just this decrepit, like mutated frog. He's very froggish in his appearance. But then also the like he lays on the schizophrenia so thick, where he doesn't even say Gollum that much. He says precious, and he's like, what is the precious? The precious. And then he's just trying to fucking eat him and shit. Awesome scene, the back and forth. And then, yeah, him rummaging through looking for the ring is just full crackhead looking for his pipe. Like, just losing it. And then it's just, but that countered with Bilbo's so not feeling like he's actually in danger. He's just like, oh, this is odd. Like, I guess I'll just find my way out. And it's just Bilbo's character has a nice arc, while maintaining his personality all the way through. But I think as a character and as a scene, that little part with Gollum is probably my favorite.
Yes, the Riddles in the Dark sequence. I do really like the goblin creations or characters, the goblin kings trying to eat Bilbo's head. There's a great shot of him opening his giant mouth and trying to, or that's not, he's not trying to eat Bilbo. He's trying to eat one of the dwarves, I believe. But it just, there's great crazy eyes. The music that's playing is wonderful. It is amazing that they fit that story into an hour 20 runtime. I do wonder, to circle back to Riddles in the Dark, I'm not trying to be a Tolkien truther because he's so innovative and so many people have copied him. But is it worth examining that he pulls like these crazy get out of like my situation story maneuvers? They're having this great riddle off, and again, this is just going back to the book, but they're having the great riddle off, and there are these crazy riddles and going back and forth, and Bilbo has the audacity to say, "What's in my pocket?" What? Like, I guess he's taking advantage of the fact that Gollum has just lost his mind and he can't be like, that's not a riddle. Let me pull up Oxford's dictionary, bro. That's a question. Like that's anyway, I'm just like, that's a crazy way to get out of that. And then the eagles saving them, not just once, but twice, just like it does in Return of the King. I'm just like, so the eagles just come like, oh, we're stuck on a tree. The eagles are here. Oh, we're stuck in the battle of 4 armies. Now it's 5 armies. The eagles are here. I'm just like, do we need a whole Tolkien accountable for creating these very tense situations and being like, and the eagles save the day, but not to save the, they're not gonna take down Smaug, but they'll get him to the forest. Anyway, that's an examination of the books. Do you guys, it's a little sidetrack, I suppose, but is it kind of strange, if we're being honest in hindsight, of being like, why are these Control-Alt-Delete moments of like, oh, the problem's gone, the eagles have shown up?
It's definitely this scenario where the dad's telling a story so his kids can fall asleep, but he just loses patience. So he's like, you know what? And then everyone died. And then he stands up and walks out of the room. Like, in the moment, it's very much like, wow, they're burning trees. These doors are running out of room. They're going to die. They're going to burn on fire. Oh, I guess the eagles could just show up. That would make sense. And it's just like, this situation is just, you're watching, you're like, okay, that's cool. And then you start to think about it. You're like, wait, but what about everything else? Like, why was that? Why is it just this huge buildup to this very small climax moment? And so I definitely think, I think that's just kind of, I think you're kind of on the money when you're talking about it's Tolkien style. Just maybe he's just tired one night and he's like writing about, really advanced details about tree limbs and then characters, and he's like, and they're on the deathbed. And then the eagles showed up, and then we're all good. And then he closes his book and he like walks out of the room. He's like, I'm good. I'll make millions.
That's a great call. Another banger, song banger.
15 birds
In 5 fir
fir
trees.
trees. Their feathers were fanned in a fiery breeze.
Yeah.
I do think you can get away with playing like 3 seconds of each song. But,
I'll try. I'll see if I can sneak them in there. What do you guys think of how they draw and portray Smaug in this? Because instead of being like a total reptilian, they make him super cat-like. He has fur down his back. He has cat eyes, which are not that different than reptilian eyes, but he has like cat eyes, and even like just it's basically like a face of a cat.
Yeah, I don't know if there is an Eastern influence with that. Obviously this is, animated by Japan, not China. It's not like the Chinese dragons or anything like that. But there is that weird, animal hybrid where he does have a definitive feline face. I love the voice. The voice really works, and the body. And I love, when he's like, there's no ailments on me. Look at me. And he flips his stomach over, just like basically just whipping his cock out, just being like, look at me. Oh, it's amazing, isn't it? And Bill was like, it's pretty good.
You don't know about that.
I shall show you. Look, what do you say to this?
I really like the way that he's animated generally. The face is weird, but it works. Like the fire and the flames, and when he's when he's got crazy eyes and he's going ape shit, like it really does work. Yeah, Callie, what do you think of Smaug's animation?
Something I love is it separates him, Smaug, as like apart from any other dragon you've ever seen or heard of. Like he doesn't look like a dragon from anything else. He just looks like someone came up with a random idea. It looks like Napoleon Dynamite when he's drawing his liger. It's just like someone was like, and now a cat face on the dragon, and you're like, okay, buddy, like you go for it. And I love the pitch of Richard Boone's voice for this role. The way he just speaks the lines is so lazy yet powerful. And then you can tell throughout the conversation, it starts going from this lazy, like, what do you, like, who even are you? And it starts to become like okay, you're annoying me and you're in my area. And so I'm just going to, and then Bilbo starts to like kind of poke at him a little bit. And I mean, Bilbo's voice in the cartoon, but also his character is very like trying to make lighthearted, eggs, bacon, hot bread, like trying to like calm himself down all the time. And so he starts to like in this like cheery voice, like, oh, like I heard dragons have soft underbellies. And Smaug's like, what? I'll show you. Like, he's just like, it's the way his voice is portrayed and the way his character is so unlike any other dragon we've ever seen. And I just, as a kid, I always loved that scene and always would come back to that scene. And as an adult, I was like, could not wait. Like, I love all the troll scenes and the goblin scenes, but I could not wait to see Smaug and see that dialogue and see him just get offended. And then, you know what? Like, the best part is he doesn't even figure out who Bilbo is. He just associates him with the town. And he's like, you're just one of those late town people. I'm going to go kill them all. And then he just freaking leaves. And Bilbo's like,
Connecting thread in Middle Earth of people can be murderous dragons, terrible frog-like golem. There can be all these different kinds of despicable characters. There's one thing they all have in common. They hate people that steal things. Gollum screams when Bilbo's getting away and he's like, thief, thief. And in this, when Bilbo reveals himself, he's like, oh, I'm just a burglar. And he's like, burglar, burglar. Smaug then exits the cave. Nobody likes a thief. Like murderers, I can understand where you stand in Middle Earth if you have to kill someone, but you steal something, you're a real piece of shit.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I love that scene, and it's not just, this isn't just reflective of the cartoon. This is just the story from Tolkien, but I do like that you see Bilbo's confidence rising slowly through the movie, and it kind of, that's like the peak of it is he starts like giving himself all these titles. He's Spider Slayer. I forget all the exact ones. He's basically
Barrel Rider is my favorite.
Barrel Rider. He's just like, I come from under the hill and over the hill, and he just starts like talking himself up in this way, and because he's gone on this long adventure, and now he has like some accolades to rest his hat on.
And he speaks confidently, while he's invisible. Like he can't even be seen, and he's talking himself up.
I love that scene with Kyle, you just touched on it already, but yeah, the progression of Smaug getting angrier and angrier, and I love the acidic saliva that drops out of his mouth and melts, like it's melting like pools of coins. He's like, as he's getting like more bloodthirsty. Awesome scene, super worth it, and yes, definitely the best part of the live action films is Benedict Cumberbatch's performance as Smaug, and the behind the scenes on that is actually really sick. Seeing him in motion capture, crawling around and stuff.
I'd say the biggest failing of the animated movie, and again, it's a animated movie for kids. The book was for kids. The animated movie's for kids. The biggest failing is the lack of definitive characterization of the dwarves. There really only are meaningful conversations between Thorin and Bilbo, or Thorin, Bilbo, and Gandalf. The other dwarves are pretty much just sideline background characters. Every now and again, they give out a line here, a line there, and I get it. It's very short. You have all these characters, but it is something that's just like kind of stands out, that the fact that most of those dwarves are sidelined to the point where there's the Battle of the Five Armies at the very end. They change it up a little bit from the book, where Bilbo actively sits out the battle, as opposed to in the book he gets knocked on the head and he just goes unconscious, which apparently it was a choice because it was trying to be like in the wake of Vietnam, and he's trying to make an active pacifist move. But then also then like they say, Gandalf says like it's like 7 of the dwarves die and we don't really see any of them, and so it kind of is this weird thing because in the book 3 of them die, and so it's kind of a weird thing where they're background characters and then half of them die, but we don't even see which ones. It's a very strange kind of muddied of the waters to kind of wrap up everything. I guess it doesn't really matter that much because the movie's focused on Bilbo and Thorin and Gandalf, and it still works in that respect. But that's kind of the only thing that bothers me throughout the movie.
Yeah, I know, I agree. That was the one thing that really does stand out. It's just like, this is a story about Bilbo and the dwarves. It's supposed to be, but it's really mostly just about Bilbo. And all the other guys just get really sidelined to a point where, yeah, they really don't say much. I think other than Thorin, maybe Bomber has the most lines. But yeah, Ori and Nori and all those guys, like they don't have much going on. So it's unfortunate, but yeah, I take this more as just like, this is The Hobbit basically exclusively through the eyes of Bilbo and not like the entire story. It's an abridged version.
Yeah. Final thoughts and ratings, Caliburger.
Am I doing
Whatever scale you want.
Sweet.
Could be a dragon scale, could be a 1 to 10 scale.
The storytelling ability and the power behind what they're able to do was something that was so amazing. And so rewatching it, like, you don't have to have good animation if you have a great story. If you have a great story that's told well, then you don't need really anything else. And so the 3 biggest highlights in this movie are characters, specifically like villains and how they're portrayed, the soundtrack, the songs, just so many great songs. I have a playlist and they've been on that playlist for like ever. And I just listen to them super randomly when I want to sing very loud in the car. And then another thing that stood out to me was just comparison of the cartoon to the movies and cartoon to the books. And it's like, no one's ever going to take pages out of a book, put it in a movie, and then not touch it. There's always going to be some things you can kind of pick out of it. But rewatching this was like amazing. Maybe it's just the fact that it's a lot of nostalgia for me, but definitely it's worth it, especially with all the new Lord of the Rings projects coming out, War Rohirrim and the second season of Rings of Power. And so I think it's definitely, it's good to go back far to see what has first happened and what has been first created, to see like what's the closest to Tolkien's heart and like what is he trying to portray. Then you watch these newer projects and you see, okay, like does this align with that or is it a little bit off? But yeah, as far as rating goes, I will go out of 10 and I will do like, as far as cartoon movies go, I'd go pretty high. Something insane. Something like a 9.1.
Whoa.
Goodness gracious.
Wow, that's high. Okay, I mean, I thought I was going to be gracious and give this like a 7.8 to an 8.2. Because I think it does a great job of trying to stay true to the source material, while having constraints. I like that they clearly couldn't show or chose not to show any sort of real killing. Like, they like stab the spider and a kaleidoscope appears, like super random shit like that. But the creatures are still designed in a really horrifying sort of way. The goblins and the spiders and Smaug and everything's designed in a way that's like, oh yeah, like this would scare little kids. So I appreciate that. And yeah, I love the character of Bilbo, for this being his story. I like the portrayal of Gandalf and Thorin. Music's great. It's short and concise to the point. I think it's a very enjoyable watch, and anybody who enjoys Tolkien's work can get something out of it. Yeah, so 7.8, 8.2, somewhere in there.
This is a movie that I would say at times feels like what do they call them? Motion comics, where it's like animated, but it's a comic, because the lack of sound effects, the lack of character facial expressions does hold the movie back, as it doesn't feel quite fully fleshed out. Obviously, it's limited because it's a TV cartoon movie. But I did really like Gandalf's portrayal, and Bilbo is a very affable character, as he's supposed to be. The Goblin characterizations are great. Smaug's great. 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10, 7. I'll say 7. It's a fun, enjoyable, definitely a labor of love. It's definitely done by people that had no visual, like they didn't have a movie to go off of. They are creating, based on the images that have been created since Tolkien wrote the books. And so it is, you're going in blind, and I think it's very respectable of the job they did. They translated Middle Earth the best they could, given the restraints of not only the budget, the animation of the time, but also just the lack of having a visual aid the way we do today of the early 2000s movies and the Hobbit movies. So props to the creators of this, and that's last page.